Okay, I see our participant numbers are climbing, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Aloha and half a day to everyone. I'm joining you from Guam, and we're going across many time zones today. We have Dr. Abby Fraser joining us from the East Coast of the continent as well. So crossing a lot of time zones today to bring you our monthly Slice of PI-CASC seminar series, which is typically held on the first Tuesday of the month at noon in Hawaii. So thank you again for joining us today. I'm Brad Romine, the Deputy Director of the University Consortium of the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center, or PI-CASC. This Slice of PI-CASC seminar series provides a platform for sharing ongoing and state-of-the-art climate adaptation research and science to management applications in Hawaii, US affiliated Pacific Islands, and beyond. You've probably got a notice coming on that this presentation is being recorded. It will be made available on the PI-CASC website under News and Events. We ask that you please keep your microphones on mute during the presentation. We will have time for questions following the presentation. Please feel free to leave questions in the chat along the way or save them until the end. At the conclusion of our seminar, we ask you to please complete our short survey to help us in planning future PI-CASC seminars. The survey will pop up after you log off of the Zoom meeting. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Abby Fraser. Dr. Fraser is a geography professor at Clark University and affiliate faculty at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. She's a climatologist who studies the spatiotemporal dynamics and impacts of climate change and climate variability. She's interested in climate extremes, particularly the impacts of drought and the El Nino Southern Oscillation on local hydrology and ecosystems in the Pacific Islands. Dr. Fraser is currently the chapter lead for the Hawaii and Pacific Islands chapter of the 5th National Climate Assessment. She also enjoys hiking with her rescue dog, Hawai'i. So please welcome Dr. Fraser. Abby, we'll hand it over to you. Go ahead and share your slides. Welcome.
Great.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for that great introduction, Brad. Hopefully you can see my screen okay. All right. So thank you all for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about one of my favorite projects that I think I've ever worked on, which is the Pacific Drought Knowledge Exchange. And this is a co-production approach to deliver climate resources to user groups. A brief outline of what I plan to cover today. So I will start by going over some motivations for the work and describe a little bit about drought in the Pacific, and then talk about how we formed the Pacific Drought Knowledge Exchange, or PDKE, and describe our pilot project. And then how we've expanded the PDKE and a lot of the different products and projects that have come out of this, and finish with some future directions. So the Pacific Drought Knowledge Exchange covers Hawaii and the US affiliated Pacific Islands. So this includes the state of Hawaii. It includes the territories of Guam and American Samoa, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and the 3 independent nations of Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. And if you are not familiar with this broad geography that we work in, we are working across a very broad spatial extent. If you overlay the exclusive economic zones around each of these islands over the United States, we're working with a greater width or range in longitudes than what you find in the continental US. And this region is made up of isolated small islands, both high islands and low islands. And these islands receive a fair amount of rainfall per year, but especially in the low island atolls, lack of storage is a big issue. And for the state of Hawaii in particular, we have extremely complex patterns, especially of rainfall, and very steep gradients. So the state of Hawaii is located around 20 degrees north latitude, which means our prevailing winds are northeasterly trade winds. They encounter our mountain slopes and produce very wet windward or east-facing areas and very dry leeward or western sides of the islands. And what's really, really incredible is when you look at the range in rainfall that we see across the state of Hawaii, it's greater than what you find on some continents. So we have areas that receive less than 10 inches of rain a year. In the capital city of Honolulu, they receive about 25 inches of rain a year. But in the mountains on the same island, you can get around 250 inches of rain. North of Hilo on Hawaii Island, the peak rainfall is about 300 inches of rain a year. On Kauai, it's 393 inches of rain a year. But our wettest spot in the state of Hawaii is East Maui, that receives on the order of 400 inches of rain a year on average. Some years are much higher than that, which makes this actually the wettest spot in the United States. So Pacific Islands are on the front lines of global climate change. They are already experiencing changes and impacts. Pacific Islands are experiencing sea level rise, high tide flooding, climate-induced migration, increased wildfires, and drought. And you may have this picture of Pacific Islands as lush tropical rainforests, and I just spent a minute talking about how wet places in Hawaii are. But so how important really is drought in these tropical Pacific Islands? And just to give you a hint, this is the US Drought Monitor time series for Hawaii over the last 2 decades. And what you can see is that the Pacific Islands experience drought events quite frequently. And one of the drivers of drought in this region is the El Niño Oscillation, or ENSO. And this is the most prominent year-to-year climate fluctuation on Earth and is a very strong driver of drought. So El Niño events in particular tend to bring dry winter conditions. And the image you can see in the top right shows that at the start of an El Niño, you actually have heavy rain and more tropical cyclone activity. But as you hit the peak of that event, you see widespread drought and increased wildfire occurrence. And because of the large-scale forcing of ENSO across the Pacific, you tend to get drought that is synchronous across a vast geography. And this relationship is fairly stable. There's some variation, but in general, we can actually use this ENSO relationship to predict drought. So when we have a forecast of what ENSO is expected to look like, we can use this to tell us about drought conditions in the Pacific Islands. So some of the motivations for this work are that recent studies have found strong drying trends and warming trends in Hawaii. And these drying trends and other increasing drought trends have been documented across the Pacific. So we wanted to really explore how drought has been changing, how drought impacts Pacific Islands. And the big focus of the talk today is how can science better inform drought management? So some of the work that I've done has looked at spatial analysis of droughts in Hawaii. And this is looking at a time series of drought events that have occurred statewide for Hawaii from between 1920 and 2019. And you can see that the worst droughts in the last century occurred between 1998 and 2002 and 2007 to 2014. And when we look at the statistics per decade, we can see that droughts are more frequent, they are lasting longer, and they have been getting more severe since 1920. And we know drought has severe impacts across multiple sectors. As I mentioned, we've looked at some of the meteorological drought impacts. We also know that drought has big impacts on farming and ranching across the Pacific Islands. And there are also big hydrological impacts of drought. So we've tried to synthesize in this report that's cited at the bottom some of the different hydrological impacts of drought, both on above ground and below ground, stream flow and groundwater. Drought also has very significant ecological impacts. Wildfire tends to be the one we notice the most, but there are lots of other impacts to both terrestrial and marine ecosystems, including things like tree mortality and impacts on endangered species. And then, of course, there's lots of socioeconomic impacts of drought. And this is anything that looks at human dimensions of drought, including drinking water shortages, which can be extremely costly disasters in the US affiliated Pacific Islands, where drinking water would actually need to be shipped in, as well as other impacts to tourism, public health, and economic revenue losses. When it comes to revenue losses, especially in the agricultural sector, we actually have pretty good data that we can track to look at how drought is affecting these both farmers and ranchers. So some of these data sets we can look at are basically federal crop insurance payouts, and drought is the #1 cause of crop loss in Hawaii. And since 1996, the federal insurance programs have paid out almost $10 million in crop losses, mostly in macadamia nuts and in coffee for the state of Hawaii. And then the livestock forage disaster program, which is another federal program related to drought losses, has paid out over $50 million to ranchers in a 10-year period. So, we've seen that drought has huge, huge economic implications for Hawaii and Pacific Islands. So in addition to documenting impacts, we wanted to know how resource managers are coping with drought. And so this is the same report that I cited a few slides ago. We compiled all of the management actions that we could find. We worked together with managers to really try to document how they are preparing for and coping with drought. And so we published this report chapter in 2019, but it actually led us to a whole bunch more questions about drought management and drought decision making. So some of the questions that came up were trying to understand how data resources are used, what information they're getting, how are they getting it, what kinds of decisions are being made with respect to drought. Are they considering drought in the planning of new activities? And what kinds of products are most useful across different sectors? And this is what led us to the conclusion that we need a knowledge exchange process for drought in the Pacific. So resource managers we were working with wanted to be more actively engaged in research and knowledge co-production. They often had limited time or training to access information. So reading lots of journal articles is usually not on the table, and they may not have skills to access complicated technical data sets. And there's no centralized data clearinghouse for drought information in the Pacific. So a knowledge exchange would allow us to develop these more formal communication mechanisms and provide easier access to comprehensive data and technical assistance. And in the Pacific, we have a great model for this through the Pacific Fire Exchange. And you can see the screenshot above of one of their fact sheets. So they've been doing this kind of work for fire-related applications. So we wanted to pilot what a knowledge exchange process would look like for drought. And we started this in Hawaii with funding from PI-CASC to work with 3 partners that are all threatened by drought, wildfire, and invasive plants and animals. So our 3 partners were the Mauna Kahalawai Watershed Partnership on Maui, the Puvawa Forest Reserve on the leeward side of Hawaii Island, and Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. And we partnered with them at the beginning of this process. They helped co-write the proposal for funding. And the goal that we wanted to accomplish was to work together to co-produce what we call drought portfolios, to basically take all this statewide information and compile it into a single place and make the results site specific, so that they don't have to guess how climate is changing and affecting their landscape. We can give them site specific information for each landscape. So we kicked off this project by bringing in Ryan Longman in November 2019. And in early 2020, we were able to meet in person with our stakeholders and have lots of great conversations about drought needs and research questions. So we were able to meet with Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and Puvawa, both on Hawaii Island. And then, as you all know, March 2020, we've had to switch to a virtual environment, which for the most part has been really, really successful. We've had excellent engagements with all of the partners, and we're able to really keep the momentum going on this project. So the site-specific portfolios I mentioned, this is walking you through what those look like in the process for developing them. So we start with a management area shapefile. So basically a polygon layer of what the management units are, what is the landscape we're looking at. And from there, we determine which sub-units to focus on. And this is a very iterative process back and forth with our partners to figure out how we want to break up the landscape, especially for a large area like Hawaii Volcanoes National Park shown here. And then once we have the sub-units that we want to focus on, we essentially are extracting data from different spatial climate layers that we have. So in the state of Hawaii, we have high resolution gridded climate data for mean climate, so rainfall and temperature, as well as other variables. We have gridded climate rainfall data sets that are time series, so we can actually look at rainfall trends spatially and again extract them for each of the units. We were able to calculate different drought metrics like SPI and look at the US Drought Monitor, look at climate relationships with ENSO specific to each land area, and then also look at other ecological characteristics like fire risk, and even extract the future climate projections for each management area. And from there, once we've extracted the data for each area, we create these visualizations and calculate other statistics. And Ryan developed all of this in an R coding environment where we just input the PowerPoint or input the shapefile of the management area, and the code outputs a PowerPoint file with all figures, descriptions, and data sources. So this is the cover page of that portfolio, and we ended up calling it a climate change, climate variability, and drought portfolio, or a CCVD portfolio. So this PowerPoint, which we end up saving as a PDF to share easier, ends up being about 30 pages long, and it's completely full of figures, tables, explanations, summaries, and other external links. So a lot of the figures I showed on the previous slide, and then a whole bunch more. So these site-specific portfolios are a go-to source of information for site-specific climate change, climate variability, and drought information. So our approach to the PDKE generally goes like this. We start with an excited partner or partners, and we start having conversations about their management area, their management priorities, and their data needs. From there, we can create these site-specific portfolios, which, as I mentioned, are completely automated. And then we review the portfolios with the managers. And from those conversations, we reevaluate which data inputs we're using, how we're displaying things, and we revise the portfolio. So this part can go through several iterations. We also, in these conversations, are documenting drought stories, lessons learned, and research questions that managers are interested in. And another output of these portfolios, once we've really honed in on the information, this is where we can come together to co-develop additional tools and outputs like fact sheets. One of the next steps that we're excited to do in this whole PDKE process is, as we work with more partners, to start compiling cross-site results and to build website resources, which I'll touch on again shortly. So from this pilot project, working with our partners, we now have a set of 10 different fact sheets that we have developed. And these, again, are co-developed with managers. There's a lot of back and forth to hone in and make sure that we're showing the right information and that this is relevant for the audience that was chosen by the manager. So fact sheets for some places are developed more for internal staff training. Others might be with a community audience in mind. So I'm going to walk through some of these, but these are pretty shiny and exciting for us. They're still new. And we worked with a great graphic designer at who helped put all these together. And we are also working with postdoc Alyssa Anderson to translate some of these into Hawaiian language. And I have a quick tier of one of those as well. So some of the topics that we developed include El Nino fact sheets. So as you can see, this is a customized fact sheet just for one of our partners, Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. what are the impacts of El Nino on climate in the park? And you can see that the maps shown on the side are completely customized and the values are customized for this land area. We also have fact sheets on future climate projections, again, tailored to each land area. So you can see the maps are customized with specific HAVO land area and values, and a whole section on why this is important. Again, because this is intended for a specific audience. We also created drought fact sheets. So this is the 100-year history of drought at Puvawa. And you can see this great figure in the bottom corner here that was developed by our graphic designer. And I couldn't help it. I had to show that the designer actually worked to customize these figures for the two different land areas. So if you're familiar with what things look like at Puvawa versus Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, you can see we tried to customize the plant and animal species that we're showing and what the landscape looks like. For Puvawa, we also developed a fire history and risk fact sheet. And again, this is the land area for Puvawa that's being shown on these maps. So highly customized fact sheet. And this is one of the first fact sheets that Alyssa worked on to translate into Hawaiian language. And so here's the original one on the left, and then in the center you can see this is our newly translated, fresh off the presses, not finalized yet version of our fire fact sheet. So Alyssa is working to expand these translations and to get more of those fact sheets translated. We're really, really excited. As part of this project, we, in this pilot stage, began working with a master's student at UH Manoa, Melissa Coons, who has since graduated. But for her project, she conducted a bunch of semi-structured interviews with natural resource managers throughout Hawaii. And she worked with a bunch of different managers and landowners and produced some really great results that we're trying to incorporate in other products. But one of the outputs, one of the things that she did as a follow-up to her master's thesis is she took the results from those interviews and translated them into 3 different statewide fact sheets. So she took her results from her thesis and created a fact sheet on drought and conservation operations in Hawaii. So taking all of these lessons learned from her interview process, including quotes, and she's turned this into another great looking fact sheet. The second fact sheet that she developed was drought and non-native mammals in Hawaii. So you can see it covers feral ungulates and rodents. And again, with each of these, she has potential management actions related to drought and these non-native mammals. And the third fact sheet she developed is drought and ecological restoration in Hawaii. So she has things like optimizing plant survival and planning for the future. So we're really excited that she was willing to take her thesis the extra mile and help create these fact sheets that we hope are useful. So the pilot project was really just such a great success. It helped us work out what this co-production process looks like and developing these site-specific portfolios. So we were able to get additional funding from PI-CASC to scale this project up and start working with additional stakeholders. So we've since been working to include a bunch of new partners, producing site-specific portfolios for each of these partners, streamlining that co-production process. And we're currently working with Patrick Grady at PI-CASC to produce a PDKE website that is coming soon. So we're really excited for that to launch as well. So because of the automation that Ryan has done with the portfolios, any stakeholder in Hawaii can now receive a portfolio. All we need is a shapefile of the land area that you would like to work with, and Ryan can create a portfolio. And one of the things we're really excited about, one of the many clearly, is that we can update these portfolios now. I don't know if you may have caught with some of the old figures, a lot of the end dates for those data sets made it so the information wasn't up to date. But just last month, we launched the new Hawaii Climate Data Portal through the University of Hawaii. And the link is here at the bottom, but on this website, the HCDP, you can get near real-time climate data. So on either the first or second day of the month, you can get last month's rainfall map. And you anytime can log in and get yesterday's temperature map. So this is really, really exciting, and daily rainfall maps are coming soon, as well as lots of other climate variables. So one of the things we're excited to do with our CCVD portfolios is to integrate this new near real-time data to bring these portfolios up to date. And with temperature data now as a time series, we can calculate a lot more drought-related metrics as well. As part of the scaling up, one of the first things that we actually did was partnered with the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science to run an adaptation planning and practices course. So this was an 8-week course that we ran in 2021. And basically we worked with natural resource management professionals to help give them hands-on training to help them identify climate adaptation actions. And this course was held entirely on Zoom and was the first time that we were applying, that the NIACS group was applying it outside of the mainland US in a tropical setting. So we ended up with 42 participants from 19 different organizations, and every participant was given a portfolio at the beginning, which was, I think, really set the stage for all of the climate data that's available, and again, very site specific. And we, if you'd like to read more about this, we just published a paper in BAMS on this workshop planning process. But the adaptation workbook is all project-based. So each participant came in with a project that they wanted specifically to learn how to identify adaptation actions. And it's a very flexible, it's not prescriptive. So, you know, we're excited to expand this process and probably try to run this again. But this was a really, really fun way for us to expand the PDKE and start working with a whole bunch of new partners across Hawaii. As part of all of this expansion effort, we realized that we needed to pull together an assessment of, you know, all of these needs that we were hearing on the ground. And as part of our NOAA-NIDIS funded project, so NIDIS is the National Integrated Drought Information System, we started compiling results from a bunch of different sources to produce what we're calling a Hawaii Drought Needs Assessment. And we have this draft ready, and we are getting ready to publish this soon. But the Drought Needs Assessment pulls from various sources, including literature review and synthesis work we've done, our meetings with resource managers, workshops and trainings, the one-on-one manager interviews that I mentioned that Melissa Kuntz led, a statewide drought information survey, which I'll talk about in just a moment, and Indigenous drought knowledge assessment work done by Katie Kamelamela. And so we've compiled information from all of these different sources about what are the gaps and needs with respect to drought in Hawaii. And this drought information survey is something that we deployed last year. And again, Melissa Kuntz, well, in partnership with Pacific RISA, led up this survey. So it was designed to engage professionals that are working on the front lines of addressing drought. And we actually modeled many of the questions after a Southwest drought survey that was also recently done. So out of all of the survey potential survey respondents that we emailed, we had about 119 that completed at least part of the survey and 69 that completed the whole thing. And about half were from government agencies of some kind, 18% from university and extension, and almost all, 86% of the respondents deal with drought in the context of conservation and restoration. So it's a limited sample in terms of who we actually had filling out the survey, but still gave us a lot of really great information. We asked lots of different questions, more than I have time to go through today, but we asked questions about drought information convenience. So how convenient is it to find drought information? How easy is it to use? And we had people saying 25% saying it's somewhat inconvenient to find, and 33% saying it's moderately difficult to use. So these seem like pretty important areas that we can help with in the PDKE. We also asked about what some of the biggest challenges are when dealing with drought. And you can see from this word cloud, we got lots of really interesting answers. I'm pretty sure the 2, 0, and 1 are people referring to the 2010 drought in particular. And we also asked what kinds of management actions worked well during the last drought. In terms of climate and drought information sources, people tend to get their information from the Weather Service, from their coworkers and colleagues, some from the news, and even the US Drought Monitor. But data accessibility was also identified as a critical need. And we asked what kinds of data tools people want to see. And it really came out that many people are interested in us building the capacity to be able to predict the onset, severity, and length of the next drought. So prediction really stood out as an area where we need more work. And one respondent emphasized the need for tailored and translated information for a range of audiences. We were pleasantly surprised to see that 50% of respondents said that they currently use or incorporate traditional cultural knowledge and/or Indigenous perspectives for managing drought. And when we asked how they do this, we got so many great answers. These are just highlighting some of them. Some incorporate into a more holistic systems thinking approach when they address issues that impact their natural ecosystems. They apply traditional planting techniques or collaborate or co-produce research with people who have traditional cultural knowledge. So really, really great information that we're still sifting through in this topic. And lastly, I'll just point out that in the survey, we also asked about drought planning. And one of the great quotes that stood out from the responses was, "When it's proactive, it's not important. And when it's happening, it's too late." And only 36% of respondents said their organization had a written drought plan, which is not great. So another area where we could improve. And again, people emphasize that proactive drought management is limited by our drought prediction capabilities. We asked about how lessons learned are retained over time and what are some of the preferred methods for sharing lessons learned with others. It tends to be informal talk story, not giving professional seminars at conferences. And a lot of people really supported the development of connections among peers. So we are still analyzing all of these results, and we are planning to write them up and submit this for publication. But it's been really, really informative to understand what the drought needs and gaps are across Hawaii. So related to the NIDIS funding that led to that drought needs assessment, they are also supporting a drought decision support tool for ranchers. So we are currently co-developing a new data portal to help ranchers proactively plan for drought. So we are working with the USDA, NRCS, University Rangeland Extension Specialists, as well as individual ranchers through the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council. And some of the information we're providing on this data portal will include 3-month projections of rainfall and forage growth based on historical climate during ENSO phases. So basically that relationship between El Nino, Southern Oscillation, and climate that I mentioned earlier, we can use that to say, if we are in a given ENSO state, let's say we're in a weak La Nina or a strong El Nino, here's what your rainfall has done in the past. And so here's a possible range of ways that your rainfall could react in the future. It's not a perfect system, but it still gives you some information relying on the historical record. And we are tapping into the Hawaii Climate Data Portal and providing real-time climate data as well as historical trends. And some of the decision support metrics include things like quarterly forage production. So we've been working on how to actually calculate forage in different grass types. The site stability So how many animal units can your site sustain, and what's the number of grazing days that you have left based on your moisture and climate conditions. So this is very much under development. Shereel Hugh with Manoa has been leading a lot of the website development, but the homepage right now has several live widgets that are tapped directly into our current ENSO state, our current wind conditions, as well as the US Drought Monitor's current weekly map. We also have it set up where you can click on different islands and get information near specific ranches. We didn't want to provide specific ranch shape files in this public setting, but giving them information that's close to different ranches. And again, plugged into the Hawaii Climate Data Portal to get that near real-time information. And then this is just a quick screenshot of some of the animal management decision support. So we have inputs where you can type, pick your grass type, type the number of animals and acres that you're grazing, and you get the historical characteristics, your historical average and your minimum over the entire record we have, which for rainfall goes back to 1920. And then we provide a bit of decision support saying, okay, your site is stable, or you might need to think about destocking or supplementing your feeding. And we are also providing some of that similar site-specific climate data. We're tapping into some NDVI and evapotranspiration data from remote sensing, as well as the rainfall and temperature. And then these are the 3-month projections I mentioned related to ENSO. So we're really excited to continue this out. We have additional funding from NIDIS to build this portal out over the next few years. And PDKE is not just in Hawaii. We are also working in other Pacific Islands as well. So for one of our PI-CASC projects, we're working in Guam, Palau, and Yap in the Federated States of Micronesia. And these islands in the Western Pacific experience very high fire activity. So building off of a 2019 workshop that we held, where we tried to hone in on initial needs related to drought, fire came out as one of the most important needs for us to understand in this region. So this is work with Clay Traunicht and folks at the US Forest Service. We are doing some detailed drought and fire analysis to better understand the relationships between drought and fire, and using some new remote sensing data. And our partners include folks from University of Guam, Guam Department of Agriculture, Yap Division of Agriculture, and the Abil Society in Palau. So these are some figures from a paper that we're working on about fire regimes in the USAPI. Fire is completely human driven in this region, and it can burn up to 10% of the land area in a year, which is really, really insane to think about. The vast majority of the area that's burned is in savanna vegetation. So the figure you can see in the top right for the island of Guam, the green is showing forested area, the yellow is savanna land. And on the right, you can see how many fires have burned between 2014 and 2019, and it's almost all in the savanna landscapes. And you end up with a lot of fires in these islands because you have a very pronounced dry season. So this figure on the bottom is showing you basically the seasonal cycle of rainfall. The dotted line is showing you mean conditions. And then the bars are showing you rainfall during strong El Nino events. And you can see at the start of that El Nino, you have higher than average rainfall. And as you head into the winter months, you have extremely dry conditions with El Nino. And so what this does is those wet conditions cause prolific vegetation growth. You build up your fire fuels. And then as you head into that dry season, you dry out all of that vegetation, and it's much more likely to burn. So El Nino and fire are strongly linked on all islands. And if you are a regular listener to the Slice of PI-CASC seminars, you may have seen our student from University of Guam, Farron, give his update of his project at the January Slice of PI-CASC seminar. But he recently administered a survey on wildfire perceptions in Guam. And we're working with him right now to translate his results into a fact sheet. So we're pretty excited about that because he found some really, really cool results on wildfire perceptions. And this is work we're teaming up again with Ryan Longman in the PDKE, and he's brought in a new analyst, Derek Ford, who's helping us sift through the downscaled climate projections for Guam and to start generating some new derived products related especially to drought. So these were published in 2016 as a report, but never really made very public. So we are trying to just get our hands on this data and see what we can do with it. So the maps right now are showing you the annual rainfall for present day conditions, and then what mean annual rainfall looks like under a low medium greenhouse gas emission scenario, RCP 4.5, and then a high emission scenario, RCP 8.5. So you can see some changes, but in this case, for mean rainfall, they're not statistically significant. But we're hoping to take these results and work on a future projections fact sheet for Guam. So similar to the future climate projections fact sheet we did in Hawaii, we'd like to see how we can apply this to Guam. And one of the other challenges as we think about expanding the PDKE to these other Pacific islands is that we don't have the same availability of gridded climate data. So we're not able to make our CCVD portfolios in the same way. So Ryan and Derek are taking on some preliminary work to just explore what it would take to develop gridded monthly rainfall maps for Guam. So we have the QA and QC code as well as gap filling code that's been developed by University of Hawaii. We have mean rainfall grids from the PRISM dataset, and we have station data. So this is a preliminary map exploring some different interpolation methods to create monthly rainfall grids for Guam. And this would allow us to calculate different spatial drought indices like the standardized precipitation index and allow us to create a portfolio that's similar to what we can produce in Hawaii, given the data. And several other in development projects. One of them is working with PI-CASC, specifically Emily Senso and Shereel Hugh again, to create K through 12 educational resources from the PDKE products. So we're looking at things like teacher workshops and trainings, producing individual portfolios for schools. And Emily and Shereel have been working to produce some drought story maps that are really cool. So this is in development, but we're really excited to see where this goes and what we can develop from this. So the PDKE has really started from the ground up, and we're not sure, how successful this would be. We were hopeful, but it's really taken off. And as you can see, we have a lot of different projects and products that have been developed, and we've come quite a long way from that initial pilot phase. So how do we sustain the Pacific Drought Knowledge Exchange into the future? And so what we're proposing going forward is that we use the PDKE to synergize efforts among our partner organizations. So you can see this giant circular logo image here on the right. And what we're proposing is some kind of alliance model. So we held a kickoff meeting at the end of last year to really assess, to share where we were at with the Pacific Drought Knowledge Exchange and to gauge interest in participating in this kind of PDKE alliance. And so all of these organizations were represented at that kickoff meeting, and we got a lot of great initial support. So we envision these organizations as becoming part of the alliance going forward. So our next steps, especially to really sustain the PDKE going forward, are to formalize our governance structure. So it doesn't sound super fun, but it's a really important part of the process to ensure that this continues on beyond individual project funding. So we need to really iron out the roles and responsibilities, the personnel. Right now, we're thinking of setting it up with 3 different teams. So a core team that's meeting weekly to discuss the on-the-ground day-to-day operations, a leadership team that meets quarterly to help guide and steer the weekly work, and then an annual advisory council group that really is overseeing the bigger direction of the PDKE. And we also hope to iron out, things like funding and code of conduct. But we are really excited about this model, and we are always looking for more partners as well. So if anyone is interested in being involved in this, do not hesitate to contact us. We'd be really, really happy to invite you to our upcoming quarterly meeting and bring you into this logo soup on the right-hand side. Okay, so to wrap up, I hope I've demonstrated how successful this pilot project was in exploring this co-production model for drought across the Pacific. And we have since expanded the PDKE to work with a diverse group of partners across Hawaii and the Pacific. And we're continuing to grow our team. We are hoping to hire someone to help us with climate extension work in the coming months. And we're excited to continue expanding, both in the sectors that we're serving as well as the partners. So if you are interested in a portfolio or interested in becoming part of the Alliance and becoming part of this team, we would love to hear from you. And I have Ryan's email here, but you're also welcome to contact me as well. So I have both of our email addresses here, and I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to all of our partners who made this possible. And I am happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Abby. Great presentation and great work by the large and very impressive PDKE team. So thanks again. So virtual round of applause from everybody, I'm sure. We do have some time for questions. Great timing on your presentation. We have at least 10 minutes for questions. So I welcome anybody to virtually raise their hand or just chime in if we should happen to miss your hand up. Of course, you're welcome to put questions in the chat as well if you'd prefer to do that too. Let's see if we have hands up at the moment. So not seeing any at this second, but keep thinking about your questions and just check one more time if you have any hands up. Abby, you guys are producing all these incredible products, informational products. The reporting function that's been developed, that automatic reporting function, is really incredible by Ryan and team. I'm just wondering, looking ahead or so far, if you could share an example or two, your favorite example or two, about how this information may be starting to get used by land managers within their management work.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'd say, from what we've heard already, it's been really, really helpful, especially in planning, especially planning out longer term, like restoration projects, especially having the site specific projection data, which we know has a lot of uncertainty. It's really, it can be very difficult to work with, but it's been really helpful to visualize, especially across diverse landscapes, how this really localized climate information. So I think that's been really helpful in planning what kinds of species should be outplanted and where. So that's one of the examples we've heard at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park with Sierra McDaniel.
Great, thank you. I see a question in the chat from William Steiner. Hopefully you can see that too, Abby, but I'll go ahead and read it for the audience. What are the plans to track invasive species spread? For example, elevation-wise, with this project, maybe using key species. So is there some overlap with invasive species work too in the PDKE?
Yeah, so with this work, we're really interested in how we can get you the information to do the work that you're all doing. So we ourselves aren't necessarily planning to track invasive species spread, but we are really, really keen on how we can help you get very specific information to help with those kinds of projects, and helping you figure out other ways to incorporate climate data as we think about managing these areas and helping to prevent spread. So we'd be really interested to talk more about that and see how we can collaborate.
Great. Thanks, Abby. I see a note from Elliot Parsons, another great example of how this work is information being applied at Pu'uwa'awa, community-based forest subsistence area. Thank you, Elliot.
Yes. Elliot and Sierra were just our champions from day one. They've been amazing, amazing partners. So thank you, Elliot, for chiming in there.
So you mentioned some next steps for PDKE. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about where you hope to go from here. Again, producing all this great information for resource managers. Is there going to be ongoing outreach to help folks in interpreting the data and applying it? What is your hopes for that looking ahead?
So we've had a pretty grand vision for a lot of these things for a while. So it's really great to see it, to be moving forward in that direction. But we see the PDKE as being a go-to centralized place for drought and climate information, and for folks to be able to know that they can contact us and work with us to work through any climate and data issues that they're having, and helping get advice on how to apply data to different management problems. So we really hope to sustain this in the future, to be that place that's not only producing these customized and translated data sets, but serving as a place where you can go to ask questions, and continue hosting our own data resources on the website that Patrick has been working on, and hosting different events and other collaborations. So we not only hope to be that source of information, but also to expand. I mean, we've gone from working mostly just in natural resource management and conservation into ranching sector and education. We want to keep expanding and helping lots of different kinds of stakeholders who deal with drought. Those are just some of the few. We have a lot of different directions.
Thanks, Abby. I see another note from William, a little more thoughts about how invasive species data might be combined and work together with the drought information. Yeah, go ahead, Abby.
Yeah, so those kinds of questions are definitely things we can work on. And that's one of the functions we'd like to see with those different teams as part of that PDKE Alliance, is helping us figure out what the focus should be going forward. So what should our work plan be over the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? And any specific projects like that are, we would love to hear from you and encourage you to join the team and help us direct our resources in those ways.
Great. I see another question from Elliot in there. I'll go ahead and read it for the audience. Any thoughts on the widespread drought in Hawaii right now, especially when it's supposed to be a La Nina year?
That is a great point. So as many of you know, La Nina typically in the past has brought us very wet winter conditions, especially for most parts of Hawaii. And we've actually noticed with the last several big La Nina events that we've actually not seen that signal of extremely wet conditions. We've actually seen pretty dry La Nina winters. And there's been some evidence of this published a few years ago, looking at declining rainfall during La Nina events. So this year seems like another kind of perfect example of that. Although I'm going to be really curious to see how it comes out, because December was so wet for most of the state, that when you average out over those months, we might not see this as the really anomalous drought year that it is. But there is actually a new paper, and it's by Henry Diaz and others. He's one of the co-authors that's examining drought in this way, and the big circulation mechanisms driving it. So there's some discussion of that there, but the La Nina relationship with rainfall seems to not be as stable as it used to be.
Okay, thank you, Abby. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. If there's any remaining questions, please feel free to raise your hand or throw them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll probably go ahead and wrap up as we're approaching the hour here. Folks may have other meetings to get to. So yeah, just join me again, thanking Abby very much, and the whole PDKE team for all their great work. Thanks for being here with us, sharing with us, Abby. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much.
Please join us at our next Slice of PI-CASC seminar, which will be Tuesday, May 3rd at noon. That's Hawaii time, where Dr. Lucas Fortini and with the USGS Pacific Islands Ecosystem Research Center will be joined also by Dr. Scott Fretz with the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and they'll talk about using a novel spatial prioritization technique to support climate resilient conservation planning for rare species in Maui Nui. So please join us for our next Slice of PI-CASC seminar there. Then the registration information for that event will be coming soon, or feel free to visit our PI-CASC website under events for updates on that and other events we host. Also remind you to please take a couple minutes to complete the survey after you log out of Zoom here. That'll pop up as soon as you log out, and it'll help us in planning future seminars. And thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again in May. Aloha, everybody. Thank you, Abby.